Please answer yes or no, Mrs. Brooks. The lawyer's voice was calm, professional, carefully modulated to sound reasonable. I'd been trying to explain where the money had gone. My salary increases over the past 3 years, the bonuses I'd earned, how I'd managed our household finances while building my career. But every time I started to give context, to provide the full picture, his hand would rise. Objection. Non-responsive. And the mediator would nod. Please just answer the question asked. Across the conference table, my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, sat perfectly still. His hands were folded in front of him, his expression neutral. He didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge that I was being systematically prevented from telling my side of the story in my own words. He just let his lawyer do it. Let this stranger speak for him, control the narrative, reduce 8 years of marriage to yes or no questions that stripped away all nuance and context. Did you earn more than your husband during the final 3 years of marriage?
Yes, but...
Yes or no, please.
Yes.
Did you maintain separate accounts?
We both had separate accounts for...
Yes or no. I closed my mouth and breathed slowly through my nose.
Yes.
My husband still wouldn't look at me. He was letting this happen. Actively choosing to let his lawyer silence me while he sat there like a neutral observer of his own divorce. The questions continued, each one designed to paint a specific picture. Did I control the household finances?
Yes.
Did I make unilateral decisions about investments? The lawyer phrased it that way, though the reality was I'd managed investments we'd agreed on. Did I limit his access to certain accounts? Every time I tried to explain, to provide context about joint decisions or agreed-upon financial strategies, the objection came. Objection. The witness is not answering the question. Sustained. Mrs. Brooks, please answer only what is asked. I watched the mediator make notes, watched my husband's lawyer build a narrative of financial control and secrecy, watched my own story get rewritten in real time by people who'd never lived a single day of our marriage. And my husband sat there, silent, complicit, letting it happen. When the mediator finally called for a break, I stood on shaking legs. The lawyer gathered his papers with efficient movements, speaking quietly to my husband. They didn't look rushed or stressed. They looked confident. Like they'd won something. I left the conference room and stood in the hallway, my back against the cool wall. Other divorcing couples passed by with their attorneys, their mediators, their own versions of this particular hell. But none of them looked quite as alone as I felt in that moment. Silenced in a room full of people, unable to defend myself with anything beyond yes and no. My phone buzzed. A text from my attorney, stay calm. We present our evidence next week. Next week. 7 more days of this narrative spreading unchecked. The stillness in that conference room had been absolute. Everyone watching me struggle to speak, to explain, to defend decisions I'd made with my husband's full knowledge and participation. Watching me get reduced to monosyllables while his lawyer painted me as controlling, secretive, financially manipulative. The mediator had looked at me with something like pity. Or maybe judgment. I couldn't tell anymore. My husband's sister had been there too, sitting in the back row as a character witness. She'd always thought I wasn't good enough for her brother. Now she was watching me get dismantled, probably satisfied that her instincts had been correct. This was public humiliation, carefully orchestrated and legally sanctioned. My voice taken away in a room designed for resolution, replaced with a narrative I didn't recognize. I drove home in silence, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The apartment I'd moved into after our separation was small, impersonal, nothing like the house we'd shared. The house I'd helped buy with my promotion bonus 3 years ago. The house his lawyer had implied I'd purchased to assert financial dominance. Inside, I made tea I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing. Every question from today played on repeat in my mind. Every objection. Every moment my husband had looked away while I was silenced. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd been building for months. The one his lawyer didn't know about yet. The one that would speak for me when I couldn't. My husband let his lawyer silence me. The financial timeline spoke louder than I ever could. That thought crystallized as I reviewed my documentation, and I realized something important. They'd focused on silencing my voice because they thought that's where my power lived, in my ability to explain, to justify, to defend. They'd never considered that I'd stopped needing to explain months ago. I'd started documenting instead. While they prepared their narrative of control and secrecy, I'd been building a timeline.
Not emotional. Not defensive. Just facts. Dates. Transactions.
Deposits and withdrawals aligned with events they thought I'd forgotten or never noticed. Every bonus I'd earned and how it was used. Every joint decision about investments. Every withdrawal my husband had made from accounts he now claimed not to understand. Every pattern that told a story completely different from the one his lawyer was presenting. I'd learned something in 8 years of marriage and 12 years in operations finance. Numbers don't lie.
They don't get emotional.
They don't need context to be understood. They simply exist, in chronological order, telling their own story to anyone patient enough to read them. My husband thought silencing my voice would win him the divorce. His lawyer thought controlling the narrative would secure favorable terms. Neither of them had considered that I'd already stopped talking and started organizing. That every question they asked today had an answer in my timeline. That the story they were telling had gaps I could fill with simple, undeniable facts. They'd underestimated me.
Again.
My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 36 years old, and I've worked in operations finance for 14 years. I started as a junior analyst and worked my way up to director of financial operations at a regional logistics company. My job involves managing budgets, tracking expenditures, identifying patterns in spending, and ensuring financial processes run smoothly.
Numbers are my language.
Spreadsheets are my native environment.
I can look at a series of transactions and see the story they tell. Who spent what, when, and why. It's not exciting work, but it's precise. Methodical. Reliable. Everything my marriage apparently wasn't.
I met my husband, Carter Brooks, when I was 28 and he was 30. He worked in sales for a pharmaceutical company, all confidence and charisma and easy charm. Where I was careful and analytical, he was spontaneous and optimistic.
We balanced each other, or so I thought. He loved that I was good with money.
You handle that stuff, he'd say with a smile, kissing my forehead.
I'm terrible at it. Numbers make my brain hurt. So I handled it.
I managed our household budget, paid the bills, organized our taxes, set up retirement accounts.
He focused on his career, on building client relationships, on being the face of our social life while I was the foundation. He called it teamwork.
A partnership where we each contributed our strengths.
I'd believed that. Right up until the moment his lawyer started describing my financial management as control, my organizational skills as secrecy, my competence as dominance. In the beginning, our financial arrangement had made sense.
Carter's income was commission-based, variable month to month. Mine was steady, predictable, with regular raises and annual bonuses. I'd set up a system where we each contributed proportionally to joint expenses, kept separate accounts for personal spending, and built shared savings for future goals.
He'd been relieved.
You're so good at this, he'd said, watching me create budget spreadsheets. I would have just thrown money at bills and hoped for the best. I'd organized everything into categories: mortgage, utilities, groceries, entertainment, retirement, emergency fund. Each month, I'd show him the spreadsheet, explain where we stood financially, discuss any big purchases or changes.
He'd nod along, say it looked great, and then go back to whatever he was doing. The details bored him. He trusted me to handle them. 4 years, that worked. His sales career grew. My operations career advanced.
We bought a house I'd carefully budget planned for. We took vacations I'd saved for systematically. We lived comfortably because I ensured we spent within our means while building for the future.
You're amazing, he'd tell me.
I don't know how you keep track of all this. I'd smile, pleased that my skills were valued, that I was contributing something essential to our partnership. I hadn't realized he'd later use that same skill against me. That, I don't know how you keep track of all this, would become, she controlled everything, I never understood our finances.
That's the thing about trust.
It can be reframed as manipulation if someone decides to change the story. 3 years ago, I'd been promoted to director. It came with a significant salary increase, 30%, and performance-based bonuses that could add another 20% to my annual compensation. I'd been thrilled, working toward this position for years. Carter had been proud too, or seemed to be. We'd celebrated with dinner at an expensive restaurant, and he'd toasted to my success.
To my brilliant wife, he'd said, raising his glass.
The promotion changed our financial landscape. Suddenly, I was earning substantially more than Carter. Not by a small margin, by nearly double. My bonuses alone sometimes exceeded his quarterly commissions. I'd adjusted our budget accordingly. We put more toward savings, paid extra on the mortgage, upgraded some things we'd been putting off. But I'd been careful to keep our lifestyle reasonable, to not let the increase lead to unnecessary spending.
Carter had started making comments. Little ones at first.
Must be nice to make the big money now. Said with a smile, like he was joking.
Guess you're the breadwinner.
I'd laughed it off, assuring him we were a team, that the money was ours, not mine. But the comments continued, growing sharper over time.
You're always working late now. I hardly see you anymore.
Money's great, but what about us?
As if my career success was somehow taking something from him. As if earning more meant loving less.
That's when I started noticing changes in our accounts. Small withdrawals I didn't remember discussing. Purchases that didn't match our budget.
The withdrawals were small at first.
$50 here, $100 there. Carter would mention he needed cash for something. Client dinners, work events, things that seemed reasonable. I'd nod, make a mental note, and update the budget accordingly.
But they kept happening.
Every week, sometimes multiple times per week. The amounts varied, but the pattern was consistent. And they always came from our joint operating account, the one we both had access to for household expenses.
Did you take out $200 yesterday?
I'd ask, reviewing our account. Yeah, had to cover some work stuff.
I'll expense it later. But the expenses never came through.
The money just disappeared into his spending without explanation. I started tracking it separately, just for my own records.
Not because I wanted to control him, but because I needed to understand our cash flow.
How could I budget accurately if money was leaving the account without documentation? After 3 months, the total was nearly $4,000. Undocumented withdrawals for vague purposes that never got explained or reimbursed. Carter, we need to talk about the cash withdrawals.
What about them?
They're adding up. I need to know what they're for so I can budget properly. He'd gotten defensive. I don't need to justify every dollar I spend. It's our money, isn't it? Or is it just your money now that you're making so much?
That had stung. I wasn't trying to control him.
I was trying to maintain the financial systems that kept our household functioning. But that's when I'd started the folder. The folder began as simple record keeping. Not an investigation, not evidence, just documentation. Every withdrawal, every undocumented expense, every time Carter pulled cash without explanation. I noted the date, the amount, any context he'd provided about what it was for.
I didn't accuse. I didn't confront beyond that initial conversation.
I just tracked. The pattern became clearer with documentation. Withdrawals spiked after I received bonuses. They increased when Carter had a slow sales quarter. They happened more frequently when I worked late or traveled for work. I added context notes. Bonus received March 15th, $12,000. Withdrawals increased week of March 18th, totaling $800 over 4 days. No explanation provided when asked. Promotion announced May 3rd. Withdrawals doubled in frequency starting May 10th. I expanded the folder to include all our financial activity. Not just the concerning parts, but everything. Joint account transactions, individual account activity, major purchases, bill payments. A complete financial picture of our marriage, organized chronologically.
I told myself I was doing it for my own clarity.
To understand what was happening to our finances. To be prepared for budget conversations.
But somewhere in the back of my mind I knew.
I was building a record because I could feel the foundation cracking. Because Carter's resentment about my career was growing. Because the comments were becoming arguments. Because I could sense something ending, and when it did, I wanted the truth documented clearly. Carter filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning. I found out when the papers were delivered to my office by a process server. My assistant had looked horrified, apologizing repeatedly as if it was her fault someone was serving me legal documents at work. I'd opened the envelope in my office with the door closed. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Standard language about irreconcilable differences.
And then, buried in the financial section, claims that gave me pause.
Petitioner claims financial confusion due to respondent's control of household finances. Petitioner requests equitable distribution of assets accumulated during marriage, including separate accounts established by respondent.
Financial confusion.
As if 8 years of me managing our money with his full knowledge and consent had somehow left him confused and victimized. I'd called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Hayes who specialized in divorces with complex financial components.
She'd reviewed the petition and frowned. He's claiming you controlled the finances to his detriment?
I managed them because he asked me to. Because numbers aren't his strength and they are mine. Do you have documentation of his involvement in financial decisions?
I have documentation of everything. Her eyebrows had risen. Everything.
Every budget discussion, every major purchase decision, every time he withdrew money or made a purchase.
8 years of complete financial records. Then we're prepared. Let him claim confusion. The records will tell a different story.
But I hadn't been prepared for how his lawyer would try to control the narrative. How they'd use legal procedures to silence any explanation, any context, any defense. How they'd reduce 8 years of partnership to yes or no questions designed to make me look manipulative. Carter's attorney was a man named Preston Ashford, and he was good at his job. Sharp, fast, commanding presence in the room.
He spoke with a kind of confidence that made people believe him before checking if what he said was actually true.
During that first mediation session, he'd controlled everything.
The pace, the questions, the tone.
He'd painted a picture of a marriage where I'd gradually taken over all financial decisions, frozen Carter out of accounts, made unilateral choices about investments and spending. My client trusted his wife to manage certain household tasks, Ashford had said smoothly. What he didn't realize was that she was systematically excluding him from financial knowledge and decision-making. He finds himself now, after 8 years of marriage, barely understanding what assets exist or where money has gone.
It was masterful fiction.
Almost believable if you didn't know the truth. He'd questioned me aggressively. Did you tell your husband about every financial decision? No, because that's impossible. Should I have discussed every grocery purchase?
Did you show him all account statements?
Yes, monthly, but he rarely looked at them. Did you require his permission for major purchases? No, because we'd agreed on spending limits that didn't require mutual approval. Every answer, stripped of context, sounded incriminating. And when I tried to explain, to provide the full picture, Ashford would object.
Your Honor, the witness is being evasive.
By the end of that session, I'd looked like exactly what he wanted. Controlling, secretive, financially manipulative.
Carter had said nothing.
Just sat there while his lawyer dismantled me. After that first session, I'd gone home and done what I do best.
I organized.
Patricia had asked for my documentation, and I'd spent 3 days compiling it into a coherent presentation.
Not emotional. Not defensive.
Just a complete financial timeline of our marriage, organized chronologically with supporting documentation for every claim. Joint account statements showing both our names, both our access. Emails where I'd sent Carter budget updates and he'd replied with approval. Text messages discussing major purchases before I made them. Spreadsheets I'd shared monthly showing exactly where our money was going.
And the withdrawals.
3 years of undocumented cash withdrawals that Carter had made from our joint account. Thousands of dollars over time, taken without explanation, never accounted for. I'd created a visual timeline. A single document that showed our complete financial history with key events marked. My promotions and how the additional income was allocated. Carter's commission fluctuations and how we'd adjusted spending accordingly.
Major purchases and the documentation of our discussions about them.
Every claim Ashford had made in that first session was addressed with simple facts.
Controlled finances?
Here are the joint account statements showing Carter's equal access.
Excluded him from knowledge?
Here are the monthly budget emails he received and acknowledged.
Made unilateral decisions?
Here are the text conversations where we discussed and agreed on major purchases.
The timeline didn't argue. It didn't defend. It just existed, clear and undeniable.
This is excellent, Patricia had said when I'd showed her. This tells the story without you having to say a word. The financial timeline I'd created was comprehensive but not overwhelming. Everything organized by date, every transaction linked to context. It showed patterns that words couldn't convey as effectively. My first promotion in year 3 of our marriage. Salary increase of $15,000. The timeline showed exactly where that money went: increased retirement contributions, extra mortgage payments, upgraded household maintenance we'd been deferring. Carter's name on every account that received the additional funds. His commission slump in year 5, 3 consecutive quarters below his average. The timeline showed how I'd adjusted our budget, dipped into savings to maintain our lifestyle, made no changes that would make him feel inadequate. Documentation of conversations where I'd reassured him it was temporary. My director promotion in year 6. Salary increase of $28,000 plus bonus potential. The timeline showed the discussion we'd had about this money, Carter's suggestions for how to use it, my implementation of those suggestions. His involvement in every major financial decision that followed. And then, starting 2 months after my promotion, the withdrawals. First one at $75, unremarkable. Then more. $100. $150. Sometimes multiple per week. The timeline showed the frequency increasing, the amounts growing, the correlation with my bonus payments clear and undeniable. 3 years of withdrawals totaling $34,200. From a joint account. With no documentation. No explanation. Despite my repeated requests for clarity about what they were for. The timeline didn't editorialize. It just showed the numbers, the dates, the pattern. And patterns tell stories that words sometimes can't. Carter had assumed I'd be emotional during the divorce. That I'd cry, argue, get defensive when his lawyer attacked my character. That's what his strategy seemed built on, making me look irrational and controlling by provoking emotional reactions. But I'd stopped being emotional about our marriage months before he filed. Somewhere during those increasingly tense arguments about money, about my career, about how I was changing, I'd realized something fundamental. We'd stopped being partners. He resented my success. He felt diminished by my higher salary. And instead of communicating about that honestly, he'd started taking money from our joint account like compensation for some perceived injustice. That's when I'd gone cold inside. Not angry. Not hurt. Just done. So when his lawyer tried to provoke me in mediation, when the questions got pointed and the implications insulting, I'd stayed calm. Answered in brief, factual statements. Showed no emotion beyond mild professionalism. It had frustrated Ashford, I could tell. Emotional witnesses are easier to discredit. Calm ones are harder to paint as unstable or irrational. Mrs. Brooks, didn't you feel guilty keeping your husband in the dark about your financial decisions? I didn't keep him in the dark. I sent monthly budget updates. But did you discuss every detail? I discussed every major decision and provided regular summaries of routine expenses. Yes or no, did you discuss every detail? No. That would be impractical. Precise. Factual. Patricia had told me later she could see Ashford getting frustrated, trying different approaches to rattle me. But I'd learned long ago, precision beats emotion in financial disputes. Always. At our second mediation session, Ashford presented Carter's financial testimony. It was smooth, well-rehearsed, designed to paint him as a confused spouse who trusted too much and been taken advantage of. I didn't realize how separate our finances had become, Carter said, his voice carrying just the right note of wounded confusion. Natalie handled everything, and I trusted her. I'd ask questions sometimes, but she'd say she had it under control. Did you have access to account information? Technically, yes. But the accounts were complicated, and Natalie had set everything up. I didn't understand most of it. Did she explain things when you asked? Sometimes. But often she'd get impatient, like I was questioning her judgment. It was a carefully crafted narrative. Just believable enough, just sympathetic enough. But then Patricia started asking questions. Mr. Brooks, you received monthly budget emails from your wife, correct? Yes. And these emails showed income, expenses, and account balances? They showed numbers, yes. Did you ever respond to these emails asking for clarification? Carter hesitated. Sometimes. How many times in the past 3 years? I'm not sure. Would it surprise you to know it was twice? Twice in 3 years, you responded asking for clarification.
His jaw tightened slightly. I was busy with work.
But you testified that you wanted to understand the finances and felt excluded from that knowledge. Yet when provided monthly detailed summaries, you asked for clarification only twice.
The first crack appeared. A hesitation in his testimony.
A timeline that didn't quite match his claims of wanting financial involvement.
Patricia submitted my documentation during that session. Not as an attack, just as evidence.
Your Honor, we'd like to introduce Exhibit A, a complete financial timeline of the marriage, compiled by Mrs. Brooks using official bank statements, account records, and documented communications. The mediator accepted it, and Patricia distributed copies to everyone in the room. Carter's face went carefully neutral as he looked at the first page. The timeline was formatted simply.
Chronological. Clean.
Every major financial event with corresponding documentation.
No emotional commentary. No accusations.
Just facts organized by date. Ashford flipped through it quickly, his expression controlled but his jaw slightly tight.
This wasn't what he'd expected.
He'd prepared for an emotional defense, for tearful explanations, for scattered documentation that could be dismissed.
Not this.
Not a comprehensive, professionally organized financial analysis that showed every single claim in Carter's testimony had a corresponding document proving a different story. This is quite extensive, the mediator commented, reviewing the timeline. Mrs. Brooks, you compiled all of this yourself?
Yes.
I maintain detailed financial records as part of my professional practice. I've simply organized our marital finances in the same format I use for work.
And everything here is documented?
Every transaction has a corresponding bank statement or account record. Every major decision has documented communication. Every claim about financial management has supporting evidence.
No drama. No defensiveness.
Just organized information presented clearly.
Ashford cleared his throat.
Your Honor, while this is thorough, it doesn't address the core issue that Mrs. Brooks maintained control over financial decisions.
Actually, Patricia interrupted calmly, it addresses exactly that.
The timeline shows documented evidence of joint decision-making, shared access to accounts, and regular communication about finances. What it doesn't show is any evidence of excluded involvement or secretive control. The mediator leaned forward, studying the timeline more carefully. She'd flipped to a section labeled Year 6, Director Promotion and Subsequent Financial Decisions. Mrs. Brooks, walk me through this section.
I did, calmly and clearly.
In March of Year 6, I was promoted to Director of Financial Operations. My salary increased from $78,000 to $106,000 annually, with performance bonuses adding potentially another $20,000 per year. My husband and I discussed how to allocate this increase.
You discussed it? How?
We had dinner that Friday to celebrate, and I asked him what financial goals he'd like to prioritize. He suggested paying down our mortgage faster and increasing our vacation budget. I implemented both suggestions.
And this is documented? Yes.
There's a text message thread from that weekend where we discussed specific amounts and accounts. The subsequent months show increased mortgage payments and a new dedicated vacation savings account, both decisions we made together. The mediator nodded, making notes. Carter shifted in his seat. His lawyer remained professionally composed, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes.
This wasn't going as planned.
Mr. Brooks, the mediator addressed him, you testified earlier that you felt excluded from financial decision-making. But this documentation shows extensive communication and implementation of your suggestions.
Can you explain that discrepancy? Carter paused.
I guess I didn't realize how much documentation there was. I just felt out of the loop sometimes. Feeling out of the loop and being actively excluded are different things. Did you ever ask for more involvement in financial management? The silence that followed was brief but telling. The mediator continued reading, and I watched her pause at a particular page.
The one I'd known would matter.
This section shows a pattern of cash withdrawals starting in Year 6, shortly after Mrs. Brooks's promotion.
Can you explain these, Mr. Brooks?
Carter's confident posture shifted slightly.
Those were just normal expenses.
The timeline shows they're labeled as undocumented withdrawals. 53 separate transactions over 3 years, totaling $34,200.
That seems significant. I used cash for various things.
Work expenses, mostly.
Were you reimbursed for these work expenses?
Some of them, yes. The timeline notes that your wife asked on multiple occasions what these withdrawals were for.
Is that accurate?
She did ask sometimes, yes. And did you provide explanation?
Carter glanced at his lawyer. I told her they were for work.
But you didn't provide details or documentation?
I didn't think I needed to. It was our joint account. I had every right to access the money.
The mediator looked up. You're correct that you had legal access. But Mrs. Brooks also asked legitimate questions about cash flow for budget planning purposes. This pattern shows 53 withdrawals that, as far as this documentation shows, were never explained or accounted for. Why does that pattern repeat every Friday?
The question hung in the air.
I'd noticed it months ago. Every Friday, like clockwork. Sometimes small amounts, sometimes larger. But consistent. A pattern that suggested routine spending, not legitimate business expenses.
Carter opened his mouth, closed it. His lawyer leaned over to whisper something. Mr. Brooks? The mediator prompted.
Carter adjusted his answer, his confidence wavering for the first time. I don't remember why they were on Fridays specifically. That's just when I happen to need cash, I guess.
For 3 years?
Every single Friday.
Not every Friday.
47 of these 53 withdrawals occurred on Fridays.
That's not random. That's a pattern.
Patricia spoke up, her voice calm. Your Honor, the timeline also shows that these withdrawals increased significantly after Mrs. Brooks received bonuses. Each bonus payment is marked in the timeline, and within 2 weeks of each bonus, the withdrawal frequency and amounts increased.
The mediator flipped to that section.
I watched her eyes track the dates, the amounts, the correlation that was impossible to ignore when displayed visually. Mr. Brooks, in the week following Mrs. Brooks's March bonus of $12,000, you withdrew $800 in cash over 4 separate transactions. The next week, another $650. This pattern repeats after each of her 3 annual bonuses. Can you explain why your cash needs increased specifically after your wife received performance compensation?
I don't think they're related.
The timeline suggests otherwise. It shows a clear correlation between bonus payments and increased withdrawals.
Ashford finally intervened.
Your Honor, I think we're reading too much into coincidental timing. Is it coincidental that it happens 3 years in a row? After every single bonus payment? The mediator's tone had shifted from neutral to skeptical.
I said nothing.
Just sat there while the numbers told the story I'd never been allowed to speak aloud. While Carter's confidence crumbled under the weight of patterns he'd thought no one was tracking.
The mediator flipped to another section. There's something else I'd like to address.
In year 7, Mrs. Brooks received her largest bonus, $18,500. The timeline shows it was deposited on June 15th.
She looked up at Carter.
On that same day, June 15th, there's a withdrawal of $5,000.
Same day. Can you explain that?
Carter's face had gone carefully blank.
I needed cash for. I don't remember specifically.
That was over a year ago. You don't remember why you needed $5,000 in cash on the exact day your wife received her largest bonus?
I might have been making a large purchase.
The timeline shows no corresponding large purchase.
No documented explanation.
Just a substantial withdrawal that you've now testified you don't remember. Patricia added, Your Honor, this pattern repeats 3 times. Each time Mrs. Brooks received a bonus, there was a significant same-day or next-day withdrawal. March bonus. Next-day withdrawal of $3,200. November bonus. Same-day withdrawal of $2,800. June bonus. Same-day withdrawal of $5,000.
The mediator's expression had hardened.
Mr. Brooks, you've testified that you felt financially excluded by your wife. That she controlled decisions and kept you in the dark. But this timeline shows you were actively withdrawing substantial amounts of money, over $34,000 over 3 years, without documentation or explanation. That's not the behavior of someone who's confused or excluded. That's the behavior of someone with full access and no accountability.
I had a right to that money.
No one is disputing your legal access. But you've built your case on claims of financial confusion and exclusion while simultaneously taking large amounts of cash without explanation. Those two narratives don't align. The mediator continued reviewing the timeline, and with each section, the pattern became more undeniable. 3 years of behavior that contradicted every claim Carter and his lawyer had made.
Year 6, she read aloud.
Mrs. Brooks requests explanation for increasing cash withdrawals. Mr. Brooks responds that he doesn't need to justify every dollar spent. Year 7, Mrs. Brooks again asks for clarification for budget planning purposes. Mr. Brooks responds that she's being controlling. Year 8, Mrs. Brooks creates separate tracking for undocumented expenses. Mr. Brooks accuses her of not trusting him. She looked up. Mr. Brooks, your wife asked legitimate questions about household cash flow. She needed that information for budget planning, which you've acknowledged was her responsibility. Yet you characterized her reasonable questions as control and mistrust.
Why?
Carter had no good answer. His lawyer whispered something, but Carter just shook his head slightly. Because, I said quietly, the first time I'd spoken without being asked a direct question, he resented that I was earning more than him. And he felt entitled to my bonus money as compensation for that resentment.
That's not true, Carter started. Then explain the pattern.
Explain why withdrawals increased after my promotions. Explain why they spiked after bonuses. Explain why every time I earned recognition for my work, you took money without accounting for it.
The mediator held up a hand.
Mrs. Brooks, I understand, but let's keep this professional. I nodded, falling silent again.
I'd made my point. The numbers had made it better.
Ashford tried to object, to redirect, to reframe Carter's financial behavior as irrelevant to the core issues of asset division. But the mediator wasn't buying it anymore. Mr. Ashford, your entire strategy has been to portray Mrs. Brooks as controlling and secretive with finances.
But the evidence shows something very different.
It shows a woman who maintained meticulous records, communicated regularly about financial decisions, implemented her husband's suggestions, and asked reasonable questions about household cash flow. Meanwhile, your client was withdrawing substantial amounts without documentation while simultaneously claiming to be confused and excluded.
Your Honor, I'm not finished.
This timeline shows 3 years of behavior that directly contradicts Mr. Brooks's testimony. He had full access to accounts. He received regular budget updates. He participated in major financial decisions. What he didn't do was take responsibility for understanding information that was freely provided to him. Patricia remained quiet, letting the mediator speak.
This was going better than we'd hoped.
Furthermore, the mediator continued, the pattern of withdrawals corresponding with Mrs. Brooks's career success suggests a different narrative than the one Mr. Brooks has presented. It suggests resentment and entitlement rather than confusion and exclusion. Objection, Ashford said firmly.
That's speculation.
It's pattern recognition, the mediator corrected.
And patterns are evidence. The timeline speaks for itself.
Ashford opened his mouth to argue further, but the mediator's expression stopped him.
Overruled.
The timeline stands as submitted, and I'm taking it fully into consideration for asset division recommendations.
I didn't look at Carter. Didn't gloat.
Just sat quietly while the evidence I'd compiled did exactly what I'd needed it to do, tell the truth. The final mediation session was brief. The mediator had reviewed all evidence and reached her conclusions about asset division. She presented them clearly, referencing the timeline throughout. Based on comprehensive financial documentation provided by Mrs. Brooks, this mediation recommends the following distribution. All assets accumulated during the marriage will be divided equitably, taking into account documented contributions and financial behavior. She detailed the specifics. The house, which I'd provided the down payment for my promotion bonus, would go to me with Carter receiving his equity share. Retirement accounts would be split proportionally to contributions, which the timeline clearly showed. Joint savings would be divided equally minus documented undocumented withdrawals, which would be calculated as Carter's early distribution. The $34,000 in undocumented cash withdrawals will be treated as Mr. Brooks's advance on marital assets. This amount will be deducted from his share of joint savings.
Carter's face went pale. You can't just. I can, and I am.
You withdrew this money without documentation or explanation despite your wife's reasonable requests for clarification. You had full access and full knowledge. These were your choices, and they have consequences. The mediator looked at both of us. The court values financial transparency and good faith in marriage. Mrs. Brooks provided extensive evidence of both. Mr. Brooks provided evidence of neither. Asset division reflects that reality. Ashford tried one more objection. The mediator dismissed it. My recommendations stand. You're welcome to reject mediation and proceed to trial, but I suspect a judge will view this timeline even less favorably than I have. Carter and Ashford exchanged glances. They knew she was right. A judge would look at 3 years of undocumented withdrawals and my meticulous record-keeping and reach the same conclusions. They accepted the mediation recommendations. The divorce proceeded to finalization with the asset division exactly as the mediator had determined. I'd won. Not with emotion or arguments or dramatic confrontations. With organized, documented, undeniable truth. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received confirmation of my promotion to Senior Director of Financial Operations. My boss had mentioned during the divorce proceedings that my position was secure, that my personal life wouldn't affect my professional standing. But the official promotion felt like vindication nonetheless. I moved into a new corner office with windows overlooking the city. My salary increased to $145,000 with enhanced bonus potential. The company was expanding my department, giving me more responsibility, more authority, more opportunity to do what I did best. My first day in the new office, Carter called. I saw his name on my phone screen and considered not answering. But curiosity won. Congratulations on the promotion, he said when I answered. No preamble. I heard through someone at your company. Thank you. Look, Natalie, I know things ended badly, but I wanted to say, I didn't realize how much you'd been keeping track of everything. The timeline really showed the truth? Silence. Then, it made me look bad. It showed your behavior accurately. There's a difference. I never meant to. I just felt like I was losing you to your career. Like the more successful you got, the less you needed me. So you took money to feel better? I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't thinking clearly. I stood at my new office window, looking out at the city. Carter, I never needed you less because I earned more. I needed you to be a partner. To celebrate my success instead of resenting it. To communicate instead of withdrawing, both emotionally and financially. I know that now. Good. I hope your next relationship benefits from that knowledge. I didn't speak to Carter again after that conversation. There was nothing left to say. The divorce was final, assets divided, both of us moving forward with separate lives. He tried reaching out once more, 6 months later, but I didn't respond. Whatever closure he needed, he'd have to find it elsewhere. I'd already spent too much time being silenced by him and his lawyer, being reduced to yes or no answers, being painted as controlling when I'd simply been competent. I was done with all of it. At work, I thrived. The promotion led to opportunities to speak at industry conferences about financial operations. I developed training programs for new analysts. I built a reputation as someone who was meticulous, reliable, and unflappable under pressure. How do you stay so calm during audits? A junior analyst asked me once. Numbers don't lie, I replied. If your documentation is solid, there's nothing to be nervous about. The truth speaks for itself. She'd nodded, making notes. I thought about that phrase often. The truth speaks for itself. That's what I'd learned during the divorce. That when you document clearly, organize thoroughly, and present facts without emotion, the truth doesn't need defending. It simply exists, undeniable. Carter had tried to silence me with his lawyer's objections, with yes or no questions, with a narrative that painted me as controlling and secretive. But he'd forgotten that I worked in operations finance. That I understood documentation and evidence and how to let numbers tell a story. My husband had let his lawyer silence me. But the financial timeline spoke louder than I ever could. And in the end, that was all I'd needed. Not volume, not emotion, not dramatic speeches. Just organized, documented, undeniable truth. When your truth is properly documented, it doesn't need defending. It doesn't need a voice. It doesn't need permission to exist.
It simply is.
Clear, factual, irrefutable. And that's more powerful than any lawyer's objections could ever overcome.
I walked away whole.